Port forwarding and triggering are two complex sounding terms in networking, and in this video I want to explain them because you may well see these on the A+ exam, and it's just two really cool pieces of functionality you need to know about even in your own private network at home. So let's first off talk about port forwarding. What exactly is it? Well, it is the ability to allow incoming data to come into your network and go to a specific computer in your private network, not based on the IP address. The person outside in the public world out there had no idea what the IP address of that interior computer is, but it's being forwarded based on the port number that was included in the request. The best way to understand this is to see a little animation of it, okay? So you've got a private network and you have a web server in there and you have an FTP server, and then you've got this access point that is connecting you from the outside public internet into your private machines, right? And so a client out there on the internet wants to communicate to your web server. Now, this device, this hub, has an IP address provided by your ISP provider, okay? It might be 107.16. something, and everything on this side back here has the 192.168.0.1, 192.168.0.2, that sort of thing. And so this person wants to communicate with this web server. Well, we can set up port forwarding so that this person uses that router's public ID and port 80, and as soon as the access point sees port 80, it automatically forwards it to the web server back here because it knows the IP address of that particular device. And so we basically told the access point forward port 80 request to the web server, even though the person calling it didn't even know the IP address of the web server, okay? And so it goes up there. One thing you need to watch, notice the note down here. Port forwarding means that this port is always open and will accept incoming traffic. Now, for a lot of people, that's somewhat scary. You need to keep a check on your security because you do have the back door open more or less to your home all the time, and anybody can come in. So you want to be careful about that. And if you look at logs overnight, it's kind of shocking how many people are doing port scans on everything in the world overnight. Now let's talk about triggering. What is triggering? Well, triggering is port forwarding that is switched on and off. It's enabled when an internal machine initiates communication on a specific port. Let's do another animation. We have a web server and we have a client inside our private network. Again, these are 192.168.0. whatever addresses. This out here is a public address, and the IP address for our access point here is a public address, okay? We want this user to be able to communicate with our web server for information, but we don't want them communicating to it until we use an application in here that contacts them, okay? And so here's what's going to happen. The client on the inside, on the private network, utilizes a program that uses port 50, and the access point knows, hey, wait a minute, if he's speaking out to someone over port 50, I need to turn on port 80, port forwarding, so that this person can access what they need. And sure enough, I turn it on. This person uses the public ID in response to what this client did on the inside with port 50, and it turns on port 80 for port forwarding, and it sends that information from this client using this public ID with port 80 back to the web server. Now, once this connection's broken or the client doesn't use it, there's usually a timeout period and it closes port 80. And if you try to hit port 80 or pass, an IP address with port 80 in here, you won't go anywhere because port forwarding is turned off. And you won't be able to get in through port 80 until a client program in here hits port 50 and kicks off or triggers port 80 for port forwarding. So that's port forwarding and triggering.